program office here in Boulder, Colorado. It's morning at least. Good evening or whatever time it is to the rest of you around the world. It is now the top of the hour, 17 UTC. We're going to go ahead and get started with the live version of the webinar. Before we begin, we always like to go over a few technical notes. One that many of you are already testing out is that we ask you to type your questions in the chat window on the left. Please remember to make sure that your speaker icon is enabled. It should be green. If you're hearing me, that should be all good for you then. Also, you can check your volume levels by selecting the Adjust Speaker Volume. If I'm too quiet, you might try checking your speaker volume and turning it up. Audio and video has only been enabled for me as the presenter, so do not worry, I cannot hear you or see you. If you have any trouble connecting or lose a connection and need assistance during the webinar, you can always email climatecampaign@globe.gov and we will try to help you troubleshoot. So the title of today's webinar is Using Long-Term Data to Study Climate. In particular, we're going to focus on the GHCN dataset. And if you don't know what that is, that's okay, because we're going to learn about that today. I'm Dr. Sarah Tessendorf. I'm part of the Science and Education team here in the Globe Program Office. So to go over an outline of what we're going to be discussing today, first we're going to define what the GHCN data is, as well as let you know where you can find the GHCN data. We'll also look at how you can use GHCN data in both the Climate Foundation's learning activities as part of the Student Climate Research Campaign, as well as in research projects. We'll talk a little bit about why you need to use long-term data in your climate research, and then we'll end with a tutorial on how you can interact via our new discussion forums. The reason why we're going to include this is because we're changing the webinars to a one-time live format, and then we're going to have a link to the discussion forums on our Globe website in our webinar archive, so that if you watch the webinar after it's been done live, you can always still ask your questions and get feedback and comments through the discussion forums on our website. We always also like to end with some important upcoming dates for the SCRC. So what is GHCN data? Well, GHCN is an acronym. It stands for Global Historical Climate Network. This network is compiled and maintained by the National Climatic Data Center. This network of data includes data from many sources to enable a long-term climate data set for climate research. This means it compiles data from various databases and networks all over the world, compiled by different countries or maintained by different organizations. It also includes measurements made with different instruments, as well as measurements made in different types of sites all over the world. Most of the data is over land sites, but we do have some data points in this network that are over the ocean because they're on buoys. Now, because this data spans a very long time frame, well over 100 years in many sites, there are some methods for quality control that must be done, and that they have already been done in this data set that NCDC provides. This data quality control removes effects such as those from instrumentation changes over time, changes in station environment, and even changes in observing practices. However, when we look at data from one site to the next, there still might be some quality control that needs to be done. So when you use the data, you do need to be cautious for any kind of outliers and any other kind of typical quality control measures you would need to do with data. So where can you find GHCN data? Well, the Globe program provides it for you on our Globe website, www.globe.gov. When you go to the Globe website, under Explore Science at the top, Finding Globe Data. This is where you can find both Globe data that is collected by students in schools, and you can visualize the Globe data with the Globe visualization system at the top, but you can also find the long-term data from GHCN at the bottom of the page. This data is provided as a KML file, which is what you use Google Earth to view. So you can download the KML file and then use Google Earth to view, to have access to the data. So in order to get the GHCN data via Google Earth, you download the file, and then when you click to open it, it should open right away in your Google Earth on your computer. However, You need to have Google Earth software already installed on your computer for this to happen. Once you're in Google Earth, I like to add place marks for the different school sites that I'm looking at. So if you have a specific school, like your own school, for example, you might want to put in your latitude and longitude as a place mark, and it'll show up on the screen as a little yellow pin drop, or push pin, I guess. And this is so I can have a context of where the school site, the globe school site is, that I'm looking for data that would be nearby to that. And then you can look at all the different pin drops of data sites from the GHCN around that. Let's zoom in on this Google Earth view to look more closely at this. So in the center of the screen on the Google Earth map, you can see I have the yellow push pin for Dietrich Bonhoeffer Schule in Germany. This is a globe school that we're going to look at some data from later in the webinar. All around the school site, you have all different sizes and colors of little pin drops. We have yellow ones, cyan, aqua blue ones, and green ones. Based on the legend at the bottom of the screen, the yellow sites have only temperature data for that station. The cyan, aqua blue sites only have precipitation data, but the green colored sites have both temperature and precipitation data for that station. You may also notice that there's different sizes of those pin drops. The smaller size pin drops don't have recent current data at those sites, but the larger pin drops do have data up to sometime within the last 6 months. So if you click on one of those sites like I've done off to the left for Thuringen, Germany, it'll pop open a bubble window that shows you the latitude and longitude of the site. Let me get my arrow here so I can point out some of these things. The latitude and longitude of the site. And since this site was a green pin drop bubble that I clicked on, it has both temperature and precipitation data. In the data details, it'll tell you the temporal range of data, the number of monthly observations that is available in that record, and the number of complete years of data. For this particular site, data goes back well into the mid-1800s for temperature data and all the way back to 1827 for precipitation data. And while the end of this record does say it only goes to 2011, that's actually a glitch in how this is being displayed in the bubble window. The data is current up through the summertime recently of 2012. One other thing I would like to point out then, take off this arrow here, is that when you're ready to download data for a specific site, you have two options under the data links here. You can download monthly mean data values or the yearly mean data values, and both have different uses. We're going to look at both examples later here in the webinar. They're both available as CSV, comma-separated files, which can easily be read into a spreadsheet such as Microsoft Excel, and those spreadsheet programs allow you to organize the data and make plots with it. So let's talk a little bit more now about how you can use the GHCN long-term data. One way that I mentioned will be about Climate Foundation's learning activities. Through these activities and using the GHCN data, you can access climate data for sites all over the world, not just at your globe school, and you can create climate graphs. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And you can also do climate research projects with this long-term GHCN data. You can use it to provide a very long-term record to look at long-term climate trends. You can use it to provide this long-term context to your globe data, because most globe data records are only available for the last 10 to 15 years. You can also use it to provide the minimum 30-year period needed to calculate climate normals. We'll talk about all of these points in a little bit more detail next. So, the Student Climate Research Campaign has two Climate Foundation's learning activities that are provided for you to do with your classrooms. On the Student Climate Research Campaign website, the URL is listed here above at the top of your screen. When you come to the website, you can click on Climate Foundations, and you'll see that there are two Climate Foundation activities. The first is From Weather to Climate. This activity takes you through using air temperature data from a globe school to take that daily data and transform it into monthly and yearly climate data. Some of the learning extensions in this activity ask you to pull data from GHCN Dataset to look at longer-term climate trends and do longer-term climate averaging for other sites all over the world. For the What is Your Climate Classification learning activity, this activity uses climographs to help you determine what your Köppen-Geiger climate classification is. So let's talk a little bit more about what is a climograph and how you can create one with the GHCN dataset. So this is an example of a climate graph from New Delhi, India. This is an example included in the What is Your Climate Classification learning activity. A climograph is a graph by month showing you what your monthly average precipitation is and temperature is. The precipitation are shown as the red bars here for each month, and the precipitation values are on the right axis. And the temperature is shown as the blue curve, and the temperature values are here on the left axis. So when you calculate one of these, each month, like say January here, represents a 30-year average of all the temperature and precipitation data for that month of January. You do the same for the February value, would be a 30-year average of all February data. Same for March, all the way through to the end of the year for December. We'll look at some more 30-year data for December here in a moment. So those are examples of how you might use the GHCN long-term data in the Climate Foundation's learning activities. You can also use it for research projects. And when you're doing research projects, you might want to view the long-term records over a really long-term period to assess climate trends. You might want to compare it with your globe data record to put that data in context. And you might also want to use it to calculate climate normals. So we'll talk about these three things. But we'll do it with an example of a research project that I've been working on using globe data. For those of you that joined the webinar three weeks ago, the webinar was on phenology protocols. And I've been looking at how the timing of bud burst has been changing over time. That's my research question. And in GLOBE, we're fortunate enough to have several schools that have been collecting bud burst data for over 10 years now. One such school is in Norway, which the data here is plotted time versus the day of bud burst each year in the vertical axis, the month / the day. And each daily or each yearly bud burst value is plotted with a blue point. And I've put a trend line through these, and you can see that over this time period, just this 10-year period, bud burst is happening earlier and earlier. What's interesting is there are a couple other GLOBE schools that have also been collecting bud burst data for over 10 years, and they also show the same trends, that bud burst is getting earlier over time. The other two schools, one is from Germany, which is the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Schule that I'm going to be showing some more detailed data for using the GHCN dataset. Recall, Thüringen, Germany was the site nearby this school. And we also want to commend the school in Croatia here for also having collected such a long-term record of bud burst data. One thing I pointed out in the last webinar was that you'll notice that 2008 was an anomalously early year for bud burst in both of these locations. And so then I looked at the globe temperature data for both of these schools to understand why. This is what the temperature data looked like. I plotted the minimum air temperature data over this roughly 10-year period from both of these schools. And you can see that for the green points, which represent the school in Germany, that the minimum temperature roughly was always below -10 degrees C, except for in 2008, it barely got below -5. Also, for the school in Croatia, the minimum temperature, based on the red points, roughly gets around -5, but in 2008, it barely got below freezing. So you can see that 2008 was an anomalous year in that it seems like it had a warmer winter. So how would this look? Let's put some of the globe data from these schools in context with the longer-term record now. In particular, for the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Schule in Germany, we're going to look at the long-term record from Thüringen, Germany now. So this is using the GHCN dataset for Thüringen, Germany. This is looking at the yearly data, looking over 160 years of annual mean temperature, starting back in the mid-1800s all the way through present year. One thing that I'll point out before we go too much further is you might notice that there is an outage in the data. We've got a long break in the data here where we're missing about 15 to 20 years of data. and it's right around 1940. Is there anybody on the webinar that might want to put some comments in the chat window about why they think that maybe there was a data outage around this time in Germany? Yes, that's my best guess as well, that World War II was happening around this time. And so when I chose this school and this site, I was not expecting to see this, but I just wanted to point out how science and history can connect. And a student that's really interested in history could do a project looking at why was the data there missing? Was the data collected and it got lost? Did this site actually get destroyed during the war and then they had to recreate the site again? There's history in the scientific data. So going back to the science content here, I also plotted a trend line over time, and over this 160-year period, you can see that the mean annual temperature is gradually warming, and it's warmed just over 0.5 degrees Celsius over this time period, based on this trend line. So this is over a very long-term period. How might this data compare with the globe record, which is over more like the recent last decade? So this is a plot now of the monthly mean temperature. So this is what I got from the monthly files of the GHCN data. This is the monthly mean temperature over this last 10-year period, roughly, for that site in Thuringen, Germany. You'll note that the 2007 to 2008 period in this monthly data was also a relatively warm period for this site. You can see in the data trend that the coldest month of the year usually has a mean temperature below freezing, except for this 2008 or 2007 to 2008 period. So this GHCN data set for this one site near this Dietrich Bonhoeffer Globe School also supports that there was something anomalous happening in that 2008 period that might have contributed to that earlier bud burst. So why else do you need to use long-term data? Well, climate research requires data that spans lengths of time that are considered relevant to climate processes. So 30 years has been determined to be the time frame for calculating climate normals. So what exactly is a climate normal? It's one of those oxymorons in the sense that normal really isn't always normal. If I told you that the mean temperature last month in Thuringen, Germany was above normal, what does that really mean? Well, that means that the mean temperature last month exceeded the average of all the September monthly mean temperatures in Thuringen, Germany for the previous 30-year period. You can also calculate these 30-year normal climate values for a variety of other metrics. You can look at them for maximum or minimum temperatures for a given day of the year or for a whole season. And so whenever you hear normal, normal is typically defined by a 30-year average, and it's usually the most recent 30-year period. So can normal change? And the answer to this question is yes. So let's compare the normal mean temperature for December in Thuringen, Germany over 100 years ago compared to this most recent 30-year period in the GHCN dataset. So on the left, I've got data plotted between 1850 and 1879. This is the 30-year average of December monthly mean temperatures. Turns out that that came to minus 0.38 degrees Celsius. And in the trend on the bottom, you can see how those individual December monthly mean temperatures changed from one year to the next over that 30-year period. When I plot the trend line, you can see over this 30-year period that there was an actual declining trend in those December monthly mean temperatures. On the right-hand side, we have the more recent 30-year period from 1982 to 2011. And then 30-year average of December monthly mean temperatures for this period was 0.72 degrees Celsius. So it's quite a bit warmer now. So in this example, normal has changed. In fact, normal has gotten warmer for December in Thuringen, Germany. When we look at the actual trend of those December monthly mean values over this time period, you can see that the trend line actually is still gradually decreasing, but at a much slower rate than it was back in the 30-year period of 1850 to 1879. You'll also note my axis on both of these plots is the same, from 8 to minus 10 degrees Celsius. So you can see that the range of values in this current 30-year period also is not as extreme as it was back in the mid-1800s. Okay, so we've gone over some examples of how you can use the GHCN dataset and why you might need to look at long-term data for climate research. Before we conclude the webinar, we wanted to give a brief informational tutorial on using discussion forums. And like I said earlier, the reason for this is we're changing to a new format where our webinars will be live once, and then we will have them up on the archive with a link to a discussion forum for interactive commenting and questioning after the fact. So the discussion forums are also a great way to interact with others in the Globe community aside from the webinar discussions. You can ask questions, you can share experiences, find others to collaborate with on common research topics, and compare your climate with others in the Globe program. We understand that not everybody is familiar with using discussion forums, so we wanted to give a brief tutorial on how to use them. So you can view most discussions without being logged in, but you do have to log in and be a member of the community to post in the discussion forums. When you're in the discussion forums, you can post new threads, either within existing categories, for example, or you can reply to posts that are already existing in a thread. Let's look at some examples. So the Student Climate Research Campaign website has a discussions forum tab, which I've highlighted here on the slide. On this tab, we have several categories already populated. One thing that I would like to point out that when you come to the Discussion Forums tab, look over on the right-hand side and there should be a subscribe button. Notice that mine is circled, it says unsubscribe, and that's because I'm already a subscriber to this discussion forum, and so anytime you guys post, I'll be able to get an email and know that you've posted so I can be an active participant in the discussion. So please, I encourage you to subscribe to the forums so that you can be an active member and participant as well. So moving down to look at the categories, we've got some populated categories in this discussion forum. The first three that you see are our intensive observing periods for the Student Climate Research Campaign. So if you are participating in any of those IOPs, we encourage you to share your experiences and ask your questions in those discussion forum categories. We also have some other categories like research topics. We have a general topics climate campaign category. We have one on teaching about climate, which if you're teaching about climate, we want to hear your experiences and how you can dispel misconceptions and how you explain climate to students. For the rest of this tutorial, we're just going to click on the research topics discussion forum category. So once you click on a given category, you'll be taken into that category page. All the threads that are available in that particular category will be at the bottom of the page. And once you're inside that category, you can either post a new thread or you can read and reply to other threads that already exist by clicking on the actual thread topic. But make sure you're logged in and a member of the SCRC community in order to reply and post to threads. If you're not a member, you click on the Members tab, which I'll highlight here, and there'll be a link to Join Community. So let's try looking at what posting a new thread looks like. This is the window that would come up. There's a blank subject line button where you can type a subject for your post thread. Then there's a body window where you can type the main part of your message. There are some optional features. You can mark it as a question. You can establish the priority and tag different keywords, but none of those are required in order for your post to be published. And then at the bottom, you have several options. You can attach files, you can save it as a draft so you can come back to it later. You can preview what it will look like or cancel, but most important, if you're ready for this to go live, you need to click Publish. So this is what it would look like if you clicked on a thread. In particular, this was the thread about budburst data analysis that I posted recently. When you're on the thread, you can read about it, and then you can reply directly to that thread with a few options that I've highlighted here in red circle. There's the regular reply, reply with quote, which just means that my message or the message that you're clicked on will be quoted in your reply. And there's a quick reply. When you hit quick reply, the window to type your message will pop up right below the thread, and there'll be a publish button at the bottom. It's a very quick and easy way to respond to a post. If you hit the regular reply, it'll take you to a window that looks just like the posting a new thread window, only the subject line will already be pre-populated with the topic of the thread. All right, thank you everybody for your attention. I'd like to give a brief summary about what all we've talked about. Today we've learned about what GHCN data is, where to find it, and how to use it. We've also learned about using the Globe website discussion forums to interact with others on the Globe in the Globe community. So we encourage you all to join in the discussion forums today. In fact, post some of your questions from today's webinar in the discussion forum, especially for people that watch the webinars in the archive. We encourage you to post questions and comments for us to interact as a community after the live webinar is completed. To finish, I'd like to remind you of the important upcoming dates for the SCRC. Right now, the Phenology and Climate Project is still going on, even though here in Colorado our green down period is about to end as most of our leaves have fallen off the tree. But for you to participate in this project, we need you to determine what time frame bud bursts, green up, and green down occur near you. And please plan to start taking your measurements at least twice per week during those times, but always start early just in case. You never know if bud burst is going to happen extra early this year. Also, if it's possible, take air temperature, precipitation, soil temperature, and/or soil moisture measurements near your phenology sites. These extra variables will help us answer questions of factors that are controlling the growing season. October is still the month for climate and land cover. This intensive observing period is still going on. You have at least another week to get out and take your land cover photographs and submit them to the website. And the next SCRC webinar, which will be an SCRC quarterly update, will be on 13th of November 2012, so please mark your calendars. Thank you all for attending, and I'll answer any questions that you have now. Greetings, Claudia, Virgil. I appreciate you attending. Thank you for coming. Glad you enjoyed it. Great to hear from you, Dixon. I see, Dixon, you asked a question earlier about the graph that I showed from the old visualization system. That's right, there was a graph that's from our old visualization system. The new system is available now, and some of these graphs can be made on the new Globe visualization system, however. Have I tried to make these graphs with the new system? No, but I certainly can try. Because the air temperature data should be available at this time, certainly. Yep, Globe. Most of the atmosphere data, I believe, is available for the new visualization system, so I just need to get in there and play with it. I'm continuing to work on this bud burst analysis, so that's definitely something that I can do as I move forward with the analysis. Are there any other questions? Please don't hesitate to ask more questions if you think of some later in the discussion forums. We will have this webinar archived on the webinar archive with a link to a discussion forum specific to this webinar. So please log in and join the discussion today, and thank you all for attending.